Some of the words in this video have been reworded in order to follow YouTube community rules. Hello everyone, this is Dalster and welcome to another episode review for Dark Side of the Ring, and in this video it talks about the life of Ludvig Borga. I heard of Ludvig Borga through a video that I watched on a YouTube channel called Age of Wrestling, and it was very telling of who Ludvig was. Ludvig was a very controversial guy as he was a racist, homophobic, and a sexist type of person. I'm pretty sure this episode will go over on who he was, so this will be interesting. Anyways, I'll go over the episode first and share my thoughts at the end. I'll call Ludvig Tony as his real name was Tony Halme or Ludvig. He came from a broken home as both of his parents had alcoholic problems. They were divorced when he was 2 years old. Growing up, Tony struggled maintaining 2 languages as his parents were born to different languages. His mother was a Swedish speaker and had enrolled Tony into a Swedish school where it was said in the episode that Tony felt like an outsider. Tony was Finno-Swedish, and where he lived, some of his neighbors or the community would shun people who were Finno-Swedish because they thought that Finno-Swedish people were the F-slur word. I can't say that word on YouTube, by the way, because of YouTube rules. And also, it's offensive. In an audio interview from 2003, as shown in this episode, Tony said that his mother chose a bottle or an alcoholic man over her own sons. He then said that he left his childhood home when he was 14 or 15 years old. Tony moved in with his childhood friend, Krister Marcusis. When they were young adults, Tony and Krister would box with one another, causing Tony to want to lift weights and build up body mass. It was said that when Tony was at the gym, he was looked down upon, but he wanted to be respected. Tony used some sort of persona or gimmick, as he would call himself the Viking, as he would also get a helmet tattoo for the persona or gimmick. He would get into street fights, including bar fights, alongside his friend Krister. In the papers, the duo were known as the Karate Guys. When Tony went to the movies one day, he got influenced by the movie Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro and decided to move to the USA and live in Los Angeles, California, so that he could be a Hollywood star. His ex-wife, Dee Dee, said that Tony wanted people to like him. When he married Dee Dee, she was told by Tony that he wanted to be famous. He also wanted to be a bodybuilder, but before wrestling, he had a big belly, and so Tony started taking steroids as well as taking horse steroids. Somehow, Tony was able to star in movies such as Little Caesars, Bush, the new WKRP in Cincinnati, and beer commercials. Back in the day, Tony would hang out at the Gold's Gym and was recommended to join wrestling. Once he got into the wrestling community, he first went to UWF as the Viking, and during that time, Herb Abrahams was the owner of the company. Afterwards, Tony went to New Japan Pro Wrestling and was a huge star over there. In New Japan, Tony was huge in body mass, but got addicted to painkillers. His personality would then cost Tony opportunities due to him rubbing people the wrong way. It was not the only place that was like that, though. Tony eventually teamed up with Scott Norton, but it later ended as they had a bar fight. It was said in the episode that Tony sucker punched Scott, but on Scott's side of the story, he said that he was the one who beat up Tony. He went back to California after getting fired from New Japan Pro Wrestling. In a 2000 interview, Tony said that people didn't like him because he was Finnish and a foreigner who had gone straight to main event status. Dee Dee said in the episode that Tony had cheated on her at one point and divorced him after being married to Tony for 3 years. Once she told him that, Dee Dee recalled Tony getting emotional and telling her that he was going to throw himself at a pier. After they divorced, Tony went to WWF in the summer of 1993. He was a huge star at first, as he was known as Ludvig Borga, a nickname for the Hellraiser from Helsinki. Vince McMahon wanted Ludvig to become an anti-American character. He had Ludvig go up against Tatanka, who at the time had a long winning streak, so he wanted Ludvig to break it. In the match against Tatanka, Ludvig pinned him with one finger after a couple of punches. Tatanka said in the episode that he felt that Ludvig was not the right guy to end his streak, as Ludvig was not friendly with anyone in the locker rooms. Jim Ross said in the episode that Ludwig had a Nazi SS symbol on his leg calf, and also said that working with Ludwig was not that great. As the head of talent relations back then, JR said that hiring Ludwig was a mistake, as he also said that it was due to Ludwig's tattoo. One example of his bad behavior was his match against Lex Luger, where Ludwig would cuss in Finnish on television. It's not the first time that a wrestler has cussed in their own language on the WWE program, by the way. Alberto Del Rio. Ludwig's character talked smack about America, but was not able to communicate or connect with the audience, even as a heel. It was said in the episode that Ludwig got the SS tattoo in order to get attention. Didi said that when Tony got back from his Russian trip, he had military tattoos and brought stuff that had Nazi symbols on them. He also got a tattoo on his butt cheeks that read "Exit Only." In a match with Rick Steiner that happened in January of 1994, Tony got an injured ankle afterwards and was then let go of WWF. After being let go of WWF, Tony would then get himself into a path of self-destruction. Tony then went to the UFC after WWF and faced Randy Couture. However, he loses his UFC match in 1 minute and then goes back to LA in order to get married again. One day, Tony got raided by the SWAT team as he was charged with trafficking steroids as well as having an illegal firearm in his house. Didi said in the episode that Tony liked to shoot guns back when they were married. Because Tony had an illegal firearm, he got deported back to Finland. When he returned to Finland, he became heavyweight champion and was known as Vikinki, Finnish for Viking. Tony then recorded a single, and it somehow became a hit. So, in the movie Die Hard 2, afterwards, he released a biography which contained violence, offensive stories, the N-word, and sexist stuff. Author Mikko Martinen, who wrote a biography of Tony's life, thought that Tony's own book was like a political manifesto. Tony then joined the troublemaking political Finland party. Back in the day, Finland had a Cold War that ended years ago, as immigration at the country had increased over the years. Somehow this irritated Tony as he tried to manipulate people's emotions so that they could vote for him. He didn't care if what he said to the people was true or not. Journalists and TV programs at the time did not want to talk about Tony as he would say racist and crazy things. One example would be Tony calling the Finnish president a lesbian for no reason and would talk racism when it came to immigration. Then in 2003, Tony won the election by a landslide. But things would get worse once he had taken office. Whenever Tony spoke in interviews, the people who worked for Tony would tell him to tone it down as he would continue to say really offensive things. In Finland history, Tony was the 5th voted person. In an audio interview from 2003, Tony said that neighbors were not able to sleep well because of foreigners, even though he had no evidence to prove that it was true. His friend Krister said that in order to get mentioned in the headlines, you have to get people to talk about you, which is the most important thing. Tony would talk so barbarically in interviews regarding Jews or the black community and would mix his facts into fiction. Around 2003, Tony got into drugs and alcohol and would mix them together. Once his business partner, Vieko, resigned in June of 2003, Tony would start to crumble. When Tony came back home to his wife one day, she wanted to divorce him, causing Tony to get upset and bring out a gun to shoot. Luckily, no one got shot or killed, as his wife was able to call the police in another room. By the time she came back, Tony was unresponsive as he had swallowed his own puke. He got sent to a hospital and was in a coma for a while. Tony got revived but received severe brain damage. His marriage ended afterwards and resigned from the parliament. Tony was eventually put on disability and his wealth would start to deteriorate. This caused Tony to get even more addicted to drugs and alcohol, but still continued to lift weights. Krister one day picked Tony up from a bar as Tony was all alone with his pants wet from his urine, while some of the people around him laughed at Tony. Days later, Krister came to celebrate Tony's birthday, but saw Tony sleeping, or so he thought he did. Moments later, Krister called the police, and the police had found Tony deceased. The police found Tony with a gunshot wound that he himself had put in. He died on January 10th, 2010. Vieko said that Tony would rather live a year as a lion than live a long life as a mouse. as he was the kind of guy that did not like to be looked at as weak. Marianne, who was a friend of Tony, said that she saw Tony as a little boy who was still hurting. She also said in the episode that if you keep carrying that hate with you all the time, that person will end up destroying themselves. JR called Tony an a-hole when asked about Tony's legacy. The author that wrote about Tony's life, named Mikko, said that Tony had revolutionized Finland politics by using what he had learned in American wrestling. When Dark Side of the Ring rolled the end credits, you can see Tony lose his match against Lex Luger. His ex-wife Dee said in the episode that Tony was a very good man to her when they married, but ended up destroying himself in the end. Interviewers for this episode are Jim Cornette, Jim Ross, Tatanka, Mikko Martinen, journalist and writer of Tony Halme's biography, Krister Marcuses, friend of Tony, Dee, Tony's ex-wife, Michael Majalati, founder of Slam Wrestling Finland, Marianne Taiga, friend of Tony, and Vieko Valin, former advisor and business partner. Other facts about Tony was that he was born on January 6, 1963 at Helsinki, Finland. Tony's father had left the family when Tony was 6 months old, even though the episode said that his parents divorced when he was 2 years old. His older brother, who was 5 years older than Tony, took on the role of a father figure for Tony. As an adult, Tony considered his brother to be his only true friend. Tony, his brother, and his mother then moved to Soka, Espoo, Finland. Years later, he studied at an engineering school called Stromberg School of Engineering, but dropped out after 2 years. He moved in with his uncle at 16 years old after he left his mother's home. At a young age, he participated in sports such as handball, football, and ice hockey. His brothers were on the Finnish national team, which inspired Tony to do power training and weightlifting. At the age of 17, he had won a silver medal at the Finnish Bodybuilding Championship. Tony also enlisted in the Finnish army and continued his training with the Finnish military sports team. Throughout his life, Tony did a lot of random jobs, such as being a bouncer in bars, a glass cutter, a fishmonger, TV and radio presenter, a coach, and a lot more. He lived in Los Angeles for 15 years. Shockingly, he was the bodyguard for the band Cheap Trick and Kiss band member Gene Simmons. While living in the US, Tony started taking anabolic steroids. When he started his wrestling training in 1989, he was trained by Vern Gagne. Tony lost his first match in New Zealand to Tom McGee. In 1990, at UWF, he was the Viking and won his match against the Patriot. On April 30th, 1991, he defeated Masashi Aoyagi in a boxer versus karate match. Tony was undefeated until Shinya Hashimoto finally ended Tony's streak. The matches Tony had with Hashimoto helped Hashimoto become a real fighter and boosted his career as well. His boxer versus wrestler gimmick ended in October of 1991 to Vader, who also has an episode coming up after this one. He and his tag team partner Scott Norton wrestled against Bam Bam Bigelow, Barry Windham, the Steiner Brothers, and the Hellraisers. In his last match with New Japan Pro Wrestling, he lost in a tag team match with the Barbarian against Haku and John Tenta. He debuted in 1993 in WWF Superstars. His entrance music in WWF was Mami, which is Finland's national anthem. At Survivor Series, for the main event match, he was in a team with Yokozuna, Q-Besser, Jacques, and Crush, and were known as the Foreign Fanatics. They were all facing the All-Americans, who were Lex Luger, The Undertaker, and the Steiner Brothers. Tony and Lex were the last two survivors, but lost to Lex in the end. When Tony wrestled against Razor Ramon in a house show match, he won, but the match continued as Ramon's foot was caught in the rope. He pinned Razor again, but got a DQ as Shawn Michaels had hit Razor Ramon with the Intercontinental title that belonged to Razor back then. WWF, now WWE, had plans for Tony at the 1994 Royal Rumble and a match with Earthquake at WrestleMania 10, but were canceled due to his ankle injury. It is said that Tony actually left the company, but they said in Dark Side of the Ring that he was let go. Tony went back to UWF for a blackjack brawl and ended up getting a double disqualification with Bob Orton Jr. He went back to Japan in August of 1994 and worked for a different promotion called Fighting Network Rings. Tony lasted until 1997. Around 1995, he used his old ring name, Ludvig Borga from WWF, in order to wrestle in Catch Wrestling Association. Over at CWA, he won the World Heavyweight Championship title, which was the only singles title that he had ever won in his life. Tony's last win before he retired wrestling was against Tony Richardson in a boxing match. Once he got into politics, Tony was a member of the Finns Party, which was a right-wing populist political party from Finland. President of Finland at the time, Tarja Halonen, was the one who Tony called a lesbian. She did not comment on his accusation, but Tony later on apologized. His term ended in 2008 as he did not go for a re-election due to health issues. When he was in the military in 1983, he had several travel bans due to not returning from vacation on time and for maltreatment. The controversial tattoo that he had was covered by tape when he was wrestling for WWF. Tony was able to get a green card because of his marriage to Adriana Estrada, who lived in the U.S. His second marriage was with Katja Talus. In the 1990s, he had a lot of firearm offenses and was deported in 1999. After he fired the gun inside his apartment, they did a police search at the House of Parliament but found illegal steroids. They had Tony's blood tested and found amphetamines, but he claimed that someone put the drugs in his drinks. He continued to serve at the House of Parliament until 2008 because of his health issues. In 2006, he was convicted for driving while impaired. Early March of 2006, Tony was involuntarily committed to a mental hospital due to delirium because of using a lot of alcohol. That same year in 2006, Tony was diagnosed with alcohol-related cirrhosis and acute pancreatitis. In December 2009, he told a newspaper that he was having impairments with his short-term memory and could not remember much, but tried to write a book about his political career. On January 8, 2010, Tony died 2 days after his birthday. The body was found 2 days later, January 10th, and at the scene of the crime, he had used an unlicensed gun. Throughout his life, Tony had written 5 books and released 1 album called Mestari Salila, translation for the champions at the gym. He almost got into the Titanic movie for a minor role, but withdrew due to a film delay. In 1993, Tony's wrestling persona was part of a Japan wrestling video game called Shin Nippon Pro Wrestling Chao Senshi in Tokyo Doom for a Super Nintendo gaming system. Tony had a Finnish documentary that came out in 2022 called Vikinki that talked about Tony's entire life. Throughout his life, Tony did not have many accomplishments. In CWA, he got the World Heavyweight Championship title, which was the only big title that he had ever had in his life. In New Japan Pro Wrestling, he won the IWGP Tag Team title with Scott Norton once. For Pro Wrestling Illustrated, he was ranked 145 out of 500 singles wrestlers for the PWI 500 in 1993. I gave this episode a 7 out of 10, as it did feel really short. There were some questions I had regarding the information that was presented in this episode. It said that WWF fired Tony, but in his biography that I found online, Tony was the one who quit. Another one was Tony's parents divorcing when he was 2 years old, but in the online page on Google, his dad left when Tony was 6 months old. I'll link up the biographies at the description box down below if you guys want to check it out yourselves. One of his ex-wives, named Dee Dee, as said in the episode, was not found on Google. She probably wanted to hide her identity since Tony was a very racist and hateful guy, so I understand. Overall, it was okay and sort of similar to the Age of Wrestling YouTube video that I saw recently. Tony's method when running for election reminds me a little of what Donald Trump did last year, and many people were fooled or manipulated by him. I'll leave it at that. Overall, Tony was a really bad man, but I don't blame all of it on him. Maybe 75% of it, as his parents are also to blame for his behavior and his life. I agree with Tony's friend, Marianne, on the part where she said that Tony was still the little boy that was still hurt over the trauma that he went through as a child. Very sad for the young Tony, but feel no pity for the adult Tony. His story reminds me of some former child stars who had it rough as a child, but as they got older, they self-destructed. Childhood trauma is very real. I myself struggle with it sometimes, but I try my best to be nice to people when I can, as sometimes I can be a little defensive. Tony was not a good man, but there were reasons why, and this is proof that mental health, especially on the children, needs to be handled better. That's all I have for this review. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Take care of your mental health and everyone around you, and I'll do the same too. Bye guys.